the Prince of Cold Stone. Prince Cailan was a man of silence, in a palace of noise. His mother, Queen Valeraine, had arranged 34 meetings with 34 princesses, each one wealthier and more beautiful than the last. Yet, Cailan felt nothing. To him, their laughter sounded like breaking glass, and their ambition smelled like stale perfume. "They want my crown, Mother," Cailan said, staring out at the whispering woods that bordered the kingdom of Oakhaven. "They do not want the man who wears it. A crown is all anyone needs." "Cailan," the queen snapped, her rings clinking as she slammed her wine goblet down. "The lineage must continue. If you do not choose a bride by the next full moon, I shall choose one for you, and you will find my taste far less forgiving than yours." That night, driven by a restlessness he couldn't explain, Cailan rode his horse into the heart of the whispering woods. The air grew thick and cold. The birds stopped singing. In a clearing, bathed in silver moonlight, he saw her. She was sitting by a black pool of water. Her skin was the color of cream, and her hair flowed down her back like a river of ink. She wore a dress made of shimmering emerald silk that seemed to move even when there was no wind. She didn't speak. She didn't even look at him. But as Cailan stepped forward, he felt a pull in his chest, a tether of pure, raw soul. "Who are you?" he whispered. The woman turned. Her eyes were not blue or brown. They were a piercing, molten gold with vertical slits for pupils. For a moment, Cailan felt a primal fear, the kind of fear a mouse feels under the shadow of a hawk. But then, she reached out and touched his hand. Her skin was unnaturally cool, but her touch was the gentlest thing he had ever felt. The hook. Cailan didn't know that the silk of her dress was actually her own shed skin, or that the forest stayed silent because every predator within 5 miles was terrified of the woman he was about to bring home. The silent bride. When Cailan returned to the palace with the mysterious woman, the court went silent. She walked with a fluid, undulating grace that made it seem like she was gliding rather than stepping. "She has no name," Cailan announced to his horrified mother. "She has no dowry, but she is the only woman who will ever share my bed." Queen Valeraine looked at the girl, whom they called Mara, with eyes full of venom. "She is a mute peasant, Cailan. She hasn't uttered a single word. How do you know she isn't a spy or a simpleton?" Mara looked at the queen. She didn't flinch. She simply tilted her head, her golden eyes tracking the pulse in the queen's neck. It was the look of a hunter evaluating a nuisance. The wedding was a cold affair. There was no music, only the sound of the wind howling against the stone walls. Mara refused to eat the roasted meats or drink the wine. She sat perfectly still, her eyes never blinking. The common folk whispered that she was a forest spirit. The nobles whispered she was a curse. That night, in the royal bedchamber, Cailan held his new bride. "I know you are more than you seem," he whispered into her hair. "I feel the power humming beneath your skin." Mara leaned into him, her tongue flicking out for a split second to taste the salt on his skin, a gesture of affection he found strange, yet deeply intimate. But as the clock struck midnight, she gently pushed him away. Her body began to tremble. Her skin grew dull, and her bones began to crack and reshape. The hook. Cailan fell into a deep, enchanted sleep, unaware that his beautiful bride was currently unfolding into a 20-foot-long nightmare, her emerald scales clicking against the marble floor as she prepared to hunt the assassins currently climbing the palace walls. The night watch outside the bedroom door, for men, moved like shadows. They were hired by a rival kingdom to ensure the prince never produced an heir. They carried daggers coated in viper venom. Inside the room, the woman was gone. In her place was a massive python, its body as thick as a tree trunk. Scales were the color of deep forest moss, and its eyes glowed with a Terrifying intelligence. The first assassin cracked the door open. He didn't see a woman. He saw a wall of muscle and scale. Before he could scream, the python struck. It wasn't a bite, it was a blur of movement. The snake coiled around him, the sound of his ribs snapping like dry twigs muffled by the heavy velvet curtains. The other three rushed in, but they were in a death trap. The serpent moved with impossible speed, tail whipping out to crack skulls against the stone, while its body constricted the life out of the leaders. By the time the moon began to set, the room was silent again. The python began to shrink. The scales softened into skin. The long, powerful tail split into legs. Mara stood over the bodies, her face pale and exhausted. With a strength no human woman should possess, she dragged the corpses to a hidden chute behind the tapestry, a hole that led to the deep moats where the crocodiles lived. When Kaelin woke the next morning, the room was spotless. Mara was tucked under the silk sheets, looking fragile and tired. "You look as though you haven't slept, my love," Kaelin said, kissing her forehead. Mara smiled, a small, sad curve of her lips. She couldn't tell him that she had saved his life for the third time this week. She couldn't tell him that every time she transformed, she lost a little bit more of her humanity. The hook, unknown to Mara, Queen Valeraine had been watching through a peephole in the wall. She hadn't seen the transformation, but she had seen the giant snake, and she was now convinced that a monster had eaten her daughter-in-law and was coming for her son next. "Would you like me to continue with the Queen's poisoned eye?" Queen Valeraine did not sleep. Her mind was a hive of stinging bees. She had seen the tail, a thick, muscular coil of emerald and shadow, disappearing behind the bed curtains. She was certain her son was sleeping next to a demon. "It is a skin changer," she whispered to her loyal captain in the cold damp of the armory. "It has swallowed the girl and taken her shape. Soon it will grow hungry for royal blood." The queen began to hatch a plan. Didn't want to just kill the beast, she wanted Kaelin to see it die. She wanted him to realize his forest bride was nothing but a stomach with scales. She ordered the palace floors to be dusted with fine white flour every night, hoping to catch the heavy trail of a serpent. In the bedroom, Mara felt the shift in the air. The palace felt like a closing fist. Her skin felt tight, itchy, and dry. The transformation was becoming harder to hide. Her human heart beat slower, while the cold, rhythmic pulse of the python grew louder in her ears. That evening, during dinner, the queen offered Mara a bowl of soup laced with a rare herb from the desert, a spice that caused extreme heat in the blood. For a human, it was a mere fever. For a cold-blooded creature, it was agony. Mara took a single sip and her golden eyes widened. Her throat felt like it was swallowing hot coals. Dropped the silver spoon, the metal clattering loudly against the marble floor. The hook, as Mara rushed from the room to find cool water, she didn't notice the trail of emerald scales falling from her arms, nor did she see the queen's triumphant smile as she pointed them out to the confused prince. The flower and the flame. The night was suffocatingly hot. Kaelin watched his wife toss and turn. She was burning to the touch, her skin dry and rough like parchment. "Water," she mouthed, her first silent plea. Kaelin ran to the pitcher, but it was empty. The queen had ordered the servants to drain every drop in the wing. As Kaelin left the room to find Mara could no longer hold her human shape. The heat from the queen's poison was forcing her blood to boil. With a sound like tearing silk, her spine lengthened. Her legs fused. The bed groaned under the sudden weight of 500 pounds of muscle. She slid off the bed, desperate for the cool dampness of the stone floors. But as she moved toward the balcony, she felt the crunch of the queen's flower beneath her. Every inch of her massive body left a clear, unmistakable rib pattern in the white powder. The queen, hiding behind the heavy tapestries with a torch in hand, watched the monster emerge. She saw the massive python, its scales dull and gray from the fever, struggling to reach the balcony. "Now!" the queen shrieked. Guards flooded the room, carrying nets woven with iron wire and long spears. The python reared back, its head reaching the chandelier. It didn't strike, it simply looked at the queen with those familiar, molten gold eyes, eyes full of betrayal and pain. The hook. The queen threw her torch onto the flower and the dry curtains, screaming, "Burn the demon!" But she didn't realize Kalen was standing in the doorway, watching his mother try to incinerate the woman he loved. The prince's choice. The fire caught quickly. The room became an orange nightmare of heat and smoke. The python thrashed, not to attack the guards, but to escape the searing pain of the flames. One guard lunged with a spear, grazing the snake's side. A deep, dark red blood, too thick to be human, spattered the floor. "Stop!" Kalen roared, diving into the room. He didn't see a monster. He saw the golden eyes of the woman who had touched his hand in the forest. "Mother, stop this madness! Look at it, Kalen!" the queen yelled, her face twisted with a dark joy. "Look at the creature you brought into our home. It is a killer. It is a beast." The python looked at Kalen. It could have crushed the guards. It could have swallowed the queen in a single strike. Instead, it bowed its head, a low hiss of sorrow escaping its throat. It lunged not at the people, but through the wall of fire, leaping from the high balcony into the dark, freezing waters of the moat below. The splash echoed through the silent night. Kalen ran to the edge, looking down into the black water. There was nothing but ripples and a few floating, charred scales. "She is gone," the queen said, preening her silk robes. "I have saved you, my son. We will find you a real woman tomorrow." Kalen didn't turn around. His voice was as cold as the water below. "You didn't save me, mother. You just drove away the only soul who ever protected this palace without asking for a crown in return." The hook. That night, Kalen didn't return to his bed. He walked to the edge of the whispering woods, unaware that a wounded, bleeding woman was crawling out of the moat, her skin half human and half scale, swearing that she would never protect the palace again, only her own heart. Should I continue with the next 3 chapters? We can explore Mara's recovery in the forest and Kalen's search for her. The blood on the mud. The water of the moat was foul and freezing, but to Mara it felt like mercy. The heat from the queen's poison and the bite of the flames began to fade, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache in her side where the spear had grazed her. She dragged her heavy, serpentine body onto the muddy banks of the whispering woods. Her scales were scorched, turning from a vibrant emerald to a sickly, charcoal gray. With a shuddering breath that sounded like grinding stones, her body began to shrink. The transformation was jagged and painful because she was so weak. When she finally stood on 2 legs, she was shivering and naked, her skin covered in soot and dried blood. Looked back at the palace. The high windows were still glowing with the orange light of the fire she had escaped. "I gave them my protection," she whispered, her voice raspy and strange as if she were learning to speak for the first time. "I gave them my silence, and they gave me iron and fire." She turned her back on the kingdom of Oakhaven. She crawled into the hollow of an ancient, rotting oak tree, pulling damp moss over her body to hide her scent. She didn't want to be a queen anymore. She didn't even want to be a woman. She wanted to be the monster they feared. The hook. As she closed her golden eyes, a dark, shimmering mist began to rise from the forest floor. The forest was responding to her pain, and it was preparing to arm its daughter with a much deadlier venom. The prince's mourning. For 3 days, Prince Kalen did not eat. He sat on the edge of the moat, staring into the murky depths. He held a single scorched emerald scale in his palm, its edges sharp enough to draw blood. "She is dead, Kaelin," Queen Valeraine said, standing over him with a silk parasol to shield her from the sun. "A beast like that cannot survive the fall and the fire. It is time to drain the moat and bury the remains. We must sanitize the palace of her filth." Kaelin stood up, his eyes bloodshot and hard. "If you drain this moat and find nothing, Mother, what will you say then?" "I will say the crows ate it," she laughed, a cold, sharp sound. The Queen ordered the engineers to open the floodgates. As the water receded, the townspeople gathered to see the skeleton of the Snake Bride. They expected a mountain of bones and a skull the size of a carriage. But as the mud settled, the moat was empty. There were no bones. There was only a trail of footprints, small, human footprints, leading away from the water and into the dark tree line of the Whispering Woods. Kaelin felt a surge of hope so violent it made him dizzy. "She lives," he breathed. The Hook, he didn't see the Queen's face turn pale. She knew those footprints meant her son would never stop searching, and she realized that if the girl was alive, she was no longer a silent victim, she was a witness to a royal attempted murder. Into the green dark. Kaelin didn't wait for his horse. He ran into the woods with nothing but a cloak and a dagger. He knew the Whispering Woods were cursed. The trees moved when you weren't looking, and the shadows had teeth. But he didn't care. "Mara!" he screamed until his throat felt raw. "Mara, come back. I didn't know. I would have died to stop her." The forest was eerily silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Kaelin pushed through thickets of thorns that tore at his royal tunics. He tripped over roots that felt like skeletal fingers. Deep in the heart of the woods he found the clearing where they had first met. The black pool was still there, but the water was now bubbling and foul. Hanging from the branches of the trees were the shed skins of hundreds of snakes, transparent, ghostly reminders of what his wife truly was. Suddenly, a low, vibrating hiss echoed from the canopy above. It wasn't the hiss of a regular animal. It was a sound that vibrated in his very marrow. "Go back, little prince," a voice whispered. It sounded like Mara's, but it was layered with 1,000 other voices, the voices of the forest itself. The Hook. Kaelin looked up and saw a pair of golden eyes glowing in the dark, but they weren't at the height of a woman. They were 20 feet in the air, drifting closer through the leaves like two dying suns. "Would you like me to continue with chapters 10, 11, and 12? The story is about to get much darker as the Queen sends hunters into the woods. The king of the forest. Kaelin did not run. He stood his ground as the massive shadow descended. The branches groaned under the weight of the creature. When the head emerged from the leaves, it was larger than a horse's, with scales that looked like hammered iron. "Mara!" Kaelin's voice trembled. "I know you are in there." The great serpent lowered its head until its snout was inches from his chest. A long, black tongue flicked out, tasting the air. It lingered on the scent of his tears and the salt on his skin. For a moment, the gold eyes softened. The giant head nudged his shoulder, almost knocking him over, a gesture of lingering love. "You must leave," the voice hissed. It was a struggle for her to form human words with a serpent's throat. "The Queen, she sends the Iron Hunters." Kaelin's blood ran cold. The Iron Hunters were the kingdom's most brutal mercenaries, men who used barbed nets and poisoned harpoons to kill the great beasts of the mountains. "I won't leave you again," Kaelin vowed, reaching out to touch the cold, hard scales. "If they come for you, they have to go through me." The Hook. As he spoke, a horn blasted in the distance, the low, brassy roar of the royal hunt. The Queen wasn't just coming for a snake, she was coming to rescue her son from a monster, even if she had to kill him to do it. The barbed net. The forest floor shook as the iron hunters crashed through the underbrush. They carried massive crossbows and chains that rattled like the laughter of ghosts. At their head was Queen Valeraine, riding a white stallion, her face hidden behind a veil of black lace. "There!" she screamed, pointing her jeweled finger at the clearing. "The beast has enchanted the prince. Do not hesitate. Fire!" A rain of heavy, iron-tipped bolts whistled through the air. Mara coiled her body around Kaelin, using her own armored back as a shield. The bolts thudded into her scales with the sound of axes hitting wood. She let out a scream that was half woman, half hiss, a sound of pure agony. A massive net, weighted with lead balls and lined with silver hooks, was launched from a portable catapult. It expanded in the air like a giant spiderweb, falling over the serpent and the prince. The hooks bit deep. Mara thrashed. But the more she moved, the more the silver barbs tore into her flesh. Silver was poison to the creatures of the Whispering Woods. It burned her skin like white-hot needles. "No!" Kaelin cried, trying to tear the net away with his bare hands, his fingers bleeding as the hooks sliced his palms. The hook, the queen rode forward, looking down at the tangled mess of scales and royal silk. "See how it clings to him," she told the hunters. "Tighten the chains. Let us see how long the demon holds its shape when we drag it behind a horse." The Dungeon of Echoes. Mara did not transform back into a woman. She knew that if she did, she would be defenseless against the queen's guards. She remained a snake, her body limp and bleeding as she was dragged in a heavy iron cage back to the palace. They threw the cage into the deepest, darkest dungeon, a place where the walls were wet with slime and the air was thin. Kaelin was locked in a tower room, the door barred from the outside. "It is for your own good, Kaelin," the queen said through the keyhole. "Once the beast is executed at dawn, the spell will break. You will thank me when you are king." Down in the dark, Mara lay in a pool of her own cold blood. The silver hooks were still buried in her side, draining her strength. She could hear the rats scurrying in the corners, waiting for her to die. Her golden eyes were closing. "Take me to the black pool," she whispered. "The earth must heal what the metal broke." The hook, as they entered the trees, the forest began to change. The leaves turned from green to a deep royal purple, and the path ahead smoothed itself out, as if the very woods were bowing to their dying queen. The price of the spirit. At the edge of the black pool, Kaelin laid Mara down. The water began to churn and rise, sensing its master. But the silver poison was deep. To wash it away, the forest demanded a price, a trade of life for life. "I cannot lose you," Kaelin sobbed, pressing his forehead against hers. "Take my years. Take my blood. Just let her stay." A voice rose from the depths of the pool, not Mara's, but the ancient spirit of the Whispering Woods. To save the serpent, the man must give up his humanity. To save the bride, the groom must wear the scales. Kaelin looked at Mara's pale face. He looked at the palace in the distance, a place of lies and knives. He didn't hesitate. He stepped into the freezing black water, pulling Mara's body in with him. The water swallowed them both. For a long minute, the surface was as smooth as glass. Then, the water began to boil. Two shapes began to emerge, swirling around each other in a dance of emerald and gold. The hook, when the water finally settled, two massive pythons lay on the bank, their tails entwined. One was emerald green, the other a regal, shimmering gold. But as the sun hit their scales, the golden snake spoke in Kaelin's voice. "I am finally free. Shall I finish the story with the final 3 chapters, 19, 20, and 21? The ending will reveal the fate of the Queen and the new guardians of the woods, the Silent Kingdom. Back at the palace, a heavy, unnatural silence fell. Without the prince, the halls felt like a tomb. Queen Valeraine wandered the corridors, clutching her silk robes, screaming for servants who no longer answered. The people of Oakhaven had packed their bags and fled to the edges of the Whispering Woods, leaving the stone walls to the dust. The queen stood on the balcony where she had first tried to burn Mara. She looked out at the forest and saw two massive shapes moving through the trees, one emerald, one gold. They moved with a harmony that no human couple could ever achieve. "They are Mox," she shrieked at the empty air. "My son is a king, not a worm." But the worms were doing what she never could. Where the two serpents passed, the blighted land began to heal. Flowers bloomed in the middle of winter, and the air lost its bitter chill. The golden snake, Kalen, felt a peace he had never known. The heavy weight of the crown was gone, replaced by the power of the earth beneath his scales. The hook, however, the queen's madness had one final card to play. If she couldn't have a son, she would ensure no one had a forest. She descended into the alchemy labs, searching for the dragon's breath, a liquid fire that could burn even the dampest wood to ash. The final ember. The queen emerged from the palace at midnight, carrying a glass orb filled with swirling red liquid. Her hair was wild, and her eyes were empty pits of gray. She walked to the very edge of the Whispering Woods, where the golden and emerald snakes lay resting. "If I cannot rule the hearts of men, I will rule the graveyard of the world," she cried. She smashed the orb against the root of the oldest tree. The dragon's breath didn't just burn, it roared. It was a magical fire that ate oxygen and magic alike. The trees began to scream, a high-pitched whistling sound as the sap boiled inside them. Kalen and Mara awoke to a wall of heat. As snakes, the fire was their greatest enemy. Their cold blood began to thin. Mara tried to use her magic to call the rain, but the dragon's breath was designed to kill magic. The queen laughed as the flames licked the sky. But in her triumph, she forgot one thing: the shadow crawlers. Without the protection of the palace walls or the peace of the forest, the ancient hungers were attracted to the light of the fire. The hook, as the queen stood gloating, a dozen invisible hands gripped her ankles. The shadow crawlers weren't hiding anymore. They pulled her toward the center of the fire she had started, a dark irony for the woman who loved to watch things burn. The karma of scales. The forest was dying, and Kalen knew there was only one way to stop a magical fire. He looked at Mara, his golden eyes communicating a lifetime of love in a single second. Together they slithered toward the heart of the blaze, right where the queen was being dragged into the earth. They didn't save the queen. They saved the world. As the two serpents coiled together in the center of the flames, they triggered the final transformation. The trade they had made at the Black Pool reached its peak. The fire didn't consume them, it fused them. In a flash of blinding white light, the two snakes vanished, and in their place rose a great rain spirit, a creature of mist and scale that towered over the trees. A torrential downpour began. Instantly, smelling of pine and ancient earth. The dragon's breath was extinguished in seconds. The queen was gone, swallowed by the rift that had opened beneath her feet, leaving only a single black lace veil floating in a puddle. When the sun rose, the palace of Oakhaven was a ruin, overgrown with vines and flowers. But in the clearing by the Black Pool, two people. But Mara was not just a forest creature, she was a daughter of the ancient earth. She began to hum, a low, vibrating frequency that traveled through the stone floors and into the very foundations of the palace. She wasn't calling for help. She was calling for the unseen enemies she had spent every night protecting the palace from. The hook. Without her protection, the ancient shadows that lived beneath the palace, things that ate shadows and breathed fear, began to wake up. And the first person they would look for was the woman who had broken the silence of the woods. The shadow crawlers. For generations, the palace of Oakhaven had been built over a rift in the earth, a place where the shadow crawlers lived. These were creatures of pure hunger, invisible to the eye, but heavy on the soul. Only Mara's presence as a great python had kept them trapped in the deep dark. Now that she was chained and bleeding, the barrier was gone. In the queen's chambers, the candles flickered and turned a sickly violet. The air grew freezing. Queen Valeraine looked in her mirror, but instead of her own face, she saw a skeletal hand reaching out from the glass toward her throat. She screamed, but no sound came. The shadows in the room began to detach themselves from the walls, creeping across the floor like spilled ink. Down in the dungeon, Mara felt the crawlers emerging. They moved past her cage, ignoring her. They didn't want the wounded protector. They wanted the warm, arrogant hearts of those who lived above. Stop! Mara wheezed, her golden eyes dimming. If they die, Kaelin dies. The hook, with a burst of agonizing effort, Mara shifted her shape. Not back into the beautiful woman, but into something halfway between a creature with pale skin, clawed fingers, and patches of shimmering scales, her eyes glowing with a feral, desperate light as she began to pick the iron lock with her own sharpened fingernails. The tower of glass. High above, Kaelin was throwing his shoulder against the heavy oak door of his tower. "Let me out," he roared. He could hear the screams starting in the hallways, high, thin shrieks of terror that cut through the night. He looked out the window and saw the palace guards dropping their spears and running in circles, clawing at the air, as if they were being choked by invisible hands. The shadow crawlers were not killing with teeth, they were killing with fear, making men's hearts stop from the sheer horror of what they felt. Suddenly, the lock on Kaelin's door didn't break, it melted. The wood charred and turned to ash. Standing in the doorway was a figure wrapped in a tattered, bloody cloak. Her face was hidden, but her golden eyes burned through the darkness. "Mara," Kaelin whispered, stepping back. She didn't speak. She held out a hand that was tipped with long, black talons. She looked monstrous, a nightmare, born of pain and betrayal. "I am what you saw," she rasped, her voice like grinding sand. "Do you still want me?" The hook. Kaelin didn't hesitate. He took her clawed hand and pulled her close, the smell of ozone and old forest filling his lungs. "I don't care what shape you take," he said. "Just tell me how to kill the things in the dark." The mother's mercy. They found the queen in the throne room, cowering under the great chair. The shadow crawlers had surrounded her, their invisible weight pressing the air from her lungs. She was gasping, her face turning a bruised purple. "Help me," she wheezed, seeing Kaelin. Then she saw the creature beside him, the half-snake, half-woman. "Mara, get it away! The demon is back!" Mara stepped forward. The shadow crawlers hissed, sensing her power. Even wounded, she was the apex predator of the spirit world. She raised her arms, and the scales on her skin began to vibrate, creating a hum so loud the windows of the throne room shattered. The crawlers recoiled. They hated the sound of the great serpent's song. One by one, they melted back into the floorboards, retreating to the rift below. The queen fell forward, gulping in. She looked up at Mara, expecting a killing blow. Instead, Mara reached down and pulled a silver hook from her own side, dropping it at the queen's feet. It was covered in Mara's blood. "I saved you," Mara said, her voice regaining its melody. "Not because you deserve it, but because he loves the memory of the mother you used to be." The hook. The queen didn't look grateful. She looked at the silver hook, then at the weakened Mara, and a dark, twisted thought formed in her mind. If Mara was human enough to feel mercy, she was human enough to be murdered with a regular knife. The knife in the dark. The throne room was silent, save for the heavy breathing of the queen. Kaelin rushed to Mara's side, wrapping his royal cloak around her shivering, scaled shoulders. He didn't see his mother's hand creep toward the fallen silver hook on the floor. "We are leaving, mother," Kaelin said, his back turned. "I am taking Mara back to the forest. You can keep your crown and your empty halls. They are all you ever loved. Anyway." The queen's eyes snapped with a final, desperate madness. To her, a son who chose a beast was no longer a son. He was a traitor to the bloodline. As they turned to walk away, she lunged. She didn't aim for Mara, she aimed for the space between Kaelin's ribs, hoping to free him from the enchantment by ending his life. Mara's serpent instincts reacted faster than any human eye. Without thinking, she twisted. The silver hook, still sharp and jagged, buried itself deep into Mara's shoulder instead of Kaelin's heart. Mara let out a low, mourning cry. She didn't strike back. She simply looked at the queen with a gaze of profound pity. The silver poison began to race through her veins again, turning her skin a ghostly, translucent white. The hook. Kaelin caught Mara as she collapsed, but as he looked up at his mother, the queen realized she had made a fatal mistake. The shadow crawlers were gone, but the prince's love had turned into a cold, vengeful fire that was much more dangerous. The transformation of Oakhaven. Kaelin didn't call the guards. He didn't scream. He picked Mara up in his arms and walked out of the palace, leaving the queen standing alone in the center of the cold, ruined throne room. "If she dies," Kaelin said, over his shoulder, "this kingdom dies with her. The shadows will return, and there will be no one left to sing them back into the earth." As he stepped out into the courtyard, the people of Oakhaven watched in hushed awe. They saw their prince carrying a creature that was half goddess and half monster. They saw the silver hook protruding from her flesh. They realized then that the monster had been the one bleeding for them all along. The queen tried to follow, shouting orders for the guards to seize them, but the soldiers stepped aside. They lowered their spears. They had seen the shadow crawlers. They knew who the real protector was. Kaelin reached the edge of the whispering woods just as the sun began to rise. Mara's breathing was shallow.